It was just past 12:40 a.m., and Highway 17 was deserted, bathed in the pale yellow glow of scattered streetlights. The only sound was the soft hum of tires gliding over asphalt and the faint buzz of insects in the woods lining the road. A crescent. Moon hung low, barely illuminating the darkened stretch that led out of the small North Carolina town. Most of the city slept, but Sergeant Clay Morrison was wide awake, cruising slowly in his patrol vehicle like a shark circling its reef. Clay had been on the force for 15 years and carried himself like he owned every inch of the badge he wore. He was the kind of cop that locals whispered about, respected by some, feared by others. He had a history of making traffic stops personal. If someone gave him a look he didn't like, they'd find themselves ticketed. If they were young, female, or black, they might get more than just a citation. He called it discipline. Others called it abuse of power. Tonight, he was bored and looking for something to shake off the monotony of the graveyard shift. That's when he saw the car. A sleek black Dodge Charger eased through an intersection ahead, its engine barely growling. It wasn't speeding, it might have been going 40 in a 35, but to Clay that was good enough. His hand moved instinctively to the light bar switch. With a flick, red and blue lights lit up the darkness like an alarm, and the siren gave one short warning burst. The Charger slowed, turned its right signal on like clockwork, and pulled onto the shoulder. No panic. No sudden moves. Just control, Sergeant. Morrison smirked. Let's see what we've got here, he muttered to himself. He grabbed his flashlight, adjusted his belt, and stepped out of the SUV with a kind of swagger that came from years of unchecked authority. As he approached the driver's side, he noticed the car was spotless, the driver calm. She was alone. Female, dark skin, neatly pressed blouse. Not the usual late-night drifter or teen-up past curfew. Interesting, The woman rolled down her window and looked directly at him. Not nervously, not with fear, but with quiet readiness. It threw him for a second. License and registration, Morrison barked, not bothering to greet her or explain the stop. She complied wordlessly, retrieving the documents from her purse and glove box. Her movements were smooth, deliberate. Not rushed. Morrison didn't like that. He liked when people squid. Is there a reason I was pulled over, Sergeant? She asked, her voice calm and clipped. Her accent was faint Southern, but refined. Not local. Morrison raised an eyebrow. You were doing 40 in a 35? He replied, folding his arms. Bit heavy on the gas pedal, don't you? Think? She blinked. The posted limit was 35 for one block. It shifts to 40 just before the stoplight. I was well within range. He didn't answer. Instead, he shone his flashlight inside the car, sweeping across the dashboard, then onto the back seat. No passengers. A military duffel bag rested neatly behind the driver's seat. You in the service? He asked, gesturing to the bag. I am, she said simply. Active duty. He leaned closer to her window, almost too close. Well, thank you for your service, ma'am. But that don't mean you can bend the law. Her gaze didn't flinch. And your badge doesn't mean you can either. Silence. That sentence hit him harder than he expected. His smirk vanished. There was something in her tone respectful, but commanding, not defiant, but firm. Like someone used to calling orders, not taking them. What's your name? He asked, narrowing his eyes. Captain Elena Matthews, she replied. United States Army. That changed things, only slightly, still. He wasn't about to back down in front of someone who dared to question his authority. Step out of the vehicle, Captain, he said, drawing out the last word like a challenge. May I ask why? She said, UNMOVING, you're acting suspicious, your eyes look glassy. I'm conducting a field sobriety test. That was a lie, and they both knew it, but Matthews didn't argue. She exhaled through her nose and unbuckled her seatbelt. Very well. She stepped out, standing tall, chin raised, posture immaculate. In full daylight, she could have passed for a drill sergeant addressing her unit. Even in the cold night, her presence radiated strength. Morrison was expecting fear. Maybe frustration, but not this control. It irritated him. He wanted her to break a little. Just enough to feel his power. He ran her through a field sobriety test. Touch your nose. Walk the line. Count backward. She passed every step with precision, no hesitation, no slurring. No imbalance. Still. He scribbled something extra on the ticket. Uncooperative. Possible signs of impairment. Captain Matthews read it and said nothing. She accepted the citation and got back into her vehicle. Morrison stood there for a second, unsure what had just happened. He'd stopped hundreds of people, but this one, it didn't go his way. And that made his chest tighten with the bitterness of bruised pride. As she drove off, he watched her taillights disappear into the fog. But what he didn't know was this. The moment she left that stop, Captain Elena Matthews wasn't just driving home. She was driving toward a courtroom, and Sergeant Morrison had no idea who he had just messed with. By the time the morning sun crawled over the North Carolina horizon, Sergeant Clay Morrison was already back at the precinct, sipping lukewarm coffee and nursing the echo of bruised ego from the night before. He sat at his desk, typing his version of the incident into the patrol report system. But instead of just noting the truth, that the woman was calm, sober, and cooperative, he added something extra. A single sentence, typed quickly, like he'd done it 100 times before. Driver exhibited defiance. Possible signs of impairment? Breathalyzer declined? It was a fabrication, plain and simple. But Morrison had done it before, and no one ever questioned him. His word was enough. In that department, the chain of trust began and ended with the uniform, and Morrison wore his like armor. He knew how to write reports that would make any civilian look suspicious, and the higher-ups rarely read past the first paragraph. Besides, it wasn't like she was anybody important, or so he thought. After finishing the report, Morrison swaggered into the break room where a couple of younger officers were talking about fantasy football. He dropped the printed citation on the table like a trophy. Pulled over some high and mighty military chick last night, he said, chuckling. Tried to tell me how to do my job. You believe that? One of the rookies looked up. She. Give you a hard time? Morrison smirked. Oh yeah, thought she was above the law. Tried to stare me down like she was in a courtroom or something. He pulled up the dashcam footage on his tablet. But not the raw version, just a clipped segment trimmed down with the audio removed. It showed the Charger pulling over and the woman stepping out. Silent, motionless, out of context. Doesn't look like much. One of the officers commented. Exactly, Morrison said. That's why I made sure to note everything down. These types always twist it around later. What he didn't realize was that Captain Elena Matthews had already begun the twist, except she didn't need to distort a thing. She had facts, receipts, and a network built on more than just uniforms and guns. She'd gotten home around 1:30 a.m., and instead of going to bed, she sat down at her kitchen counter and wrote out a detailed incident report line by line, with timestamps, location, tone of voice, and everything that happened. Then she uploaded her GPS tracker log from her car's dashboard app. It showed her driving a steady 38 miles per hour through the area in question, completely within legal range. She checked the time-stamped security footage from a nearby gas station she had passed just before the traffic stop. It captured her car gliding calmly past without erratic movement. She saved it all in a single folder on her desktop and labeled it Evidence 17N Incident SGT Morrison. Then she made a call, not to the local police, to the Pentagon, because Captain Elena Matthews was more than just a decorated Army officer. She was also an appointed JAG Corps attorney with direct access to high-level military oversight. She didn't call to report a bad cop. She requested immediate review under the Military Civil Oversight Protocol for Service Member Rights, a rarely used but very real program that investigates civilian authority abuses toward active duty personnel. By noon, the Department of Defense. Liaison had reviewed her initial claim and opened an internal case. And by the end of the day, that single traffic stop had been elevated to a federal matter. Back at the precinct, Morrison's smirk was still plastered across his face. His shift was over, and he was getting ready to leave when the desk clerk looked up from her phone. Hey, Clay, she said casually. You know that woman you stopped last night? What was her name? Matthews. Why? She just filed a civil rights complaint, not with us, with the feds. He paused, keys in hand. Feds? Yep, I guess she's military or something. Legal department upstairs is already scrambling, Morrison laughed. Yeah, okay. I'm sure they'll take her side. But as he walked out, something itched at the back of his mind. That name, Matthews, why did it sound familiar? The answer came the next morning. He was called into the chief's office, Chief Randall Wilson, who had been his mentor for years. Wilson didn't smile this time. He held a manila folder in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. Clay, he said, voice low. We've got a problem. Morrison sat down, puzzled. What kind of problem? Chief Wilson slid the folder across the desk. You remember that stop you made on 17N? Captain Elena Matthews? She's not just active duty. She's Army JAG, with clearance higher than both of ours combined. Morrison's blood went cold. The chief continued. She's filed a formal motion. Civil rights violation. Possible. Abuse under color of law, and she's naming you specifically. There's also a hearing scheduled, federal courtroom. 2 weeks from now. Morrison leaned back, disbelief creeping in. Come on, Randy, this is over a ticket. Wilson's face hardened. This is over you lying in a report, and her team has proof. Audio, video, and 3 witnesses from her military unit backing. Her up. This isn't going away. For the first time in a long time, Sergeant Clay Morrison felt something he hadn't felt on the job in years. Fear. Not from a gun, not from the street, but from someone he thought would be easy to control, and the worst part? She hadn't even started fighting yet. 2 weeks later, the courthouse parking lot was full before 9 a.m., and the air outside buzzed with attention that didn't belong to any ordinary traffic case. Inside the federal courtroom, everything looked normal on the surface oak benches. Flags hanging behind the judge's bench, clerks typing quietly, but there was an invisible weight in the air. Like everyone knew, this wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a reckoning. Uniformed officers in pressed blues filled the left side of the gallery. Some were there in silent support of Sergeant Clay Morrison. Others came out of curiosity, knowing his name had floated around internal circles for years. On the right sat a mix of civilians, military members in dress uniform, 2 local journalists, and a few legal observers from the Department of Defense. When Sergeant Morrison walked in with his defense attorney, he wore a charcoal gray suit, and that same smug face he always carried on patrol. He looked around the courtroom like it belonged to him, nodded at a few familiar faces, and made a cocky comment under his breath to his layer, She's probably gonna cry halfway through. But when Captain Elena Matthews entered moments later, the temperature of the room seemed to shift. She walked in wearing her full Class A Army dress uniform. Her ribbons told a story of deployments, of cases won and commands held. Her boots clicked with precision across the tile floor, her shoulders squared, her chin high. But it wasn't just the uniform that commanded attention, it was her presence. She carried herself like someone who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. Morrison's smile faded a fraction. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Once seated, the proceedings began. Matthews Attorney Major Aaron Bishop, also J.A. Juro's first. Calm, clear, and confident, she began laying out the case not as a simple incident, but a pattern of abuse enabled by a badge. She spoke not with anger, but with controlled gravity. Your Honor, this isn't about a parking violation or a simple oversight. This is about what happens when an officer of the law weaponizes his authority against citizens, specifically a decorated army officer who posed no threat, showed full compliance and was targeted solely because Sergeant Morrison expected submission. Asterisk, she walked to the center of the courtroom and pulled up the first piece of evidence, dashcam footage, unedited, with audio, asterisk. It played on the monitor as the courtroom sat in silence. Asterisk, Morrison's voice was unmistakable, condescending, smug, and dismissive. His words, "You in a hurry to get home, sweetheart?" echoed off the walls. Then the exchange about her being uncooperative, followed by his false claim of possible impairment. Asterisk, when the footage ended, Bishop handed over GPS logs, time-stamped gas station surveillance, and Matthew's breathalyzer reading 0.00 asterisk. She turned toward the judge. This wasn't an error, it was intent. And it didn't stop at the roadside. He falsified the report. This one, she held up the document, and marked her as impaired, which could have damaged her security clearance, her deployment status, and her reputation. Asterisk, then she delivered the next blow. 2 additional sworn affidavits from other women in town. Asterisk, both claimed Sergeant Morrison had pulled them over in separate incidents. One woman said he implied she'd get a ticket unless she cooperated with his flirtation. Another recalled being cited for resisting a breathalyzer test she was never asked to take. The pattern was undeniable. Morrison's lawyer tried to push back. "She's military." Maybe she overreacted. Officers misinterpret things all the time under stress. She might have taken his tone too personally. Captain Matthews stood up, with permission. She took the stand. Her testimony wasn't emotional, it was surgical. "I've served in 3 countries. Interrogated war criminals, and prosecuted military officers for dereliction of duty. I know what professional conduct looks like and what abuse of power smells like. That night I knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't see a soldier. He didn't see a citizen. He saw a woman alone at night, and he thought I'd stay quiet." The room was still. Even Morrison looked away. Asterisk, she paused, then looked directly at the judge. Asterisk, and if I hadn't been in uniform, with a rank and a network behind me, he'd have gotten away with it again. That is the problem. The prosecution rested. Morrison's defense didn't even call him to the stand. Asterisk, the judge sat in silence for a long minute before speaking. Asterisk, I have reviewed the facts, testimony, and supporting evidence. Based on the severity of the false statements in the official report, the misuse of authority, and the corroborating claims by other citizens, I am ordering the immediate suspension of Sergeant Morrison, pending internal affairs review. Additionally, this matter will be forwarded to the U.S. Attorney's Office for consideration of charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. The gavel fell, the courtroom stirred, asterisk, and Morrison's face turned pale. For the first time, asterisk, he didn't look at Matthews as she gathered her documents and walked out. Shoulders straight, face calm, justice trailing in her wake like the tail of a flag. The courtroom had witnessed something rare that day. A man who thought he was untouchable had just been held accountable by the very woman he tried to silence. The buzz inside the courthouse hadn't died down by the next morning. In a small town where law enforcement rarely faced consequences, especially one of their own, word of Morrison's suspension spread like wildfire. His name was no longer whispered with respect. Now it was laced with tension, curiosity, and for some, quiet vindication. At the precinct, the mood had shifted. The silence in the locker room was unnatural. Usually full of banter, locker slams, and football talk, it now echoed with awkward footsteps and half-formed thoughts. No one looked directly at Morrison when he entered to clean out his things. Some avoided eye contact. Others watched quietly, unsure if they should feel bad for him or relieved that someone had finally pulled the curtain back. Asterisk, he walked stiffly to his locker. No longer in uniform, just jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. His badge had been turned in the day before, along with his sidearm. They were placed in a sealed evidence bag like any other case file. No ceremony, no handshake. Just cold paperwork and a temporary access revocation notice signed by the chief himself. Asterisk, as Morrison pulled out a box to pack up his gear. Officer Raymond Ellis, one of the younger patrolmen, approached slowly. Asterisk, Clay, he said, voice low. You okay, man? Asterisk Morrison looked up, eyes tired. What do you think? Asterisk Ellis hesitated. I didn't think it would go that far. I mean, I always figured you pushed the line, but asterisk, save it, Morrison muttered, cutting him off. You think I'm the only one who's done it? You think this badge works if you play by the book all the time? Asterisk Ellis didn't respond. He just stood there for a moment, then quietly stepped away, asterisk in his gut. Morrison felt the shift. He wasn't just being punished. He was being left behind. Asterisk down the hall. Chief Randall Wilson sat at his desk, going over paperwork from internal affairs. The call from the U.S. Attorney's office had already come in. Morrison's case was being formally reviewed. If charges were filed, he could lose his pension and face federal prison time. And there was nothing Wilson could do to stop it, not anymore. Asterisk, the chief stared at Morrison's personnel file. Asterisk, so many warnings. So many internal notes quietly brushed aside over the years. Asterisk, a knot formed in his chest. Maybe if he'd acted earlier, maybe if someone had. Asterisk, meanwhile, across town, Captain Elena Matthews returned to her base. She didn't walk in triumphantly. There were no press conferences or victory speeches. She quietly resumed her duties like nothing had happened. But the respect in the eyes of those around her had deepened. Asterisk colleagues approached her with nods that carried more weight than words. Asterisk one soldier, Sergeant Taylor, stood outside her office that afternoon and asked if he could speak privately. Asterisk, ma'am, he said, closing the door behind him. I watched the hearing. Matthews looked up from her desk. My sister, he continued. She was pulled over by that same cop last year. Said he made her cry. Said he made up something on the ticket but told her to shut up and deal with it. She never filed a complaint. Thought no one would believe her. Asterisk Matthews paused. She wasn't wrong to think that. Asterisk Taylor swallowed hard. But now she believes she wasn't crazy. That it wasn't her fault. So, thank you for not letting it go. Asterisk Matthews gave a faint smile. Tell her she wasn't alone. And now she's not invisible. Asterisk later that week, an internal memo was circulated among North Carolina law enforcement. It was brief but impactful. Asterisk all departments are advised to review procedures related to traffic. Stops involving active duty personnel, federal oversight. Will be increasing compliance checks and random audit reviews effective immediately. Change reel, institutional change was beginning to trickle in, slowly, quietly. Morrison, meanwhile, stayed home. He avoided the news. But he couldn't avoid the silence. Asterisk he'd once walked through his town with his chest out, chin up, badge gleaming under the sun. Now people looked through him, or worse, at him with judgment. Asterisk his lawyer called daily. He didn't answer. He knew what was coming. Suspension would turn to termination. Termination might lead to an indictment. The federal case against him was growing stronger with each passing day. Asterisk, and all of it started because he'd pulled over a woman who didn't react the way he expected. He thought she would get scared. He thought she would cry. He thought she would stay silent. But she did single quote T. Asterisk, and now every inch of power he thought he owned, every ounce of control he built his identity on was slipping through his fingers like sand. Asterisk, and no badge could stop it. 3 weeks after the courtroom ruling, the town of Ashford began to settle back into its usual rhythm. Headlines moved on to other stories. The courthouse returned to small claims and traffic disputes. But in the quiet undercurrent of local conversations in barber shops, diners, church pews, and school hallways, people still spoke of the case. Asterisk. They didn't mention it by name. They didn't have to. Everyone knew what it meant when someone said, that kind of thing won't fly anymore. Asterisk Sergeant Clay Morrison resigned before the full investigation concluded. It wasn't voluntary, though he tried to make it seem that way. His department issued a sterile, 3-line press statement. Asterisk Officer Clay Morrison has stepped down. Effective immediately. The department continues to cooperate with ongoing legal proceedings. Asterisk, there were no photos, no plaque, no handshakes. Just silence and a cardboard box carried to his pickup truck by a man no one looked in the eye anymore. Asterisk his house. Once the brightest on the block with flagpoles and porch lights, now had drawn curtains and an overgrown lawn. He stopped showing up at the grocery store. When he did, people whispered or avoided him altogether. A few glared. One woman, a teacher, dropped her basket and left when she saw him in the same aisle, and yet there was no satisfaction in it, not for Captain Elena Matthews, because justice, in its truest form, isn't about punishment. It's about protection, correction, prevention, and somewhere deep inside. Matthews knew that this wasn't just about Morrison, it was about every officer who thought the badge was a sword instead of a shield, one afternoon. As she exited a federal building after testifying in a military conduct case, a young woman was waiting outside. She was standing near a bench, holding a folded paper, her expression cautious but determined. Matthews noticed her but didn't react until the woman stepped forward. Excuse me, she said softly. Are you Captain Matthews? Matthews turned, scanning the woman's face. She was maybe 20, brown skin, tightly braided hair, wearing jeans and a hoodie that hung slightly off one shoulder. Yes. Matthews said. The young woman held up the paper. It was a traffic citation. Faded and creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. He pulled me over 2 years ago, she said, her voice quivering just enough to reveal the wound still open. I was 17. He said I was acting suspicious, but I wasn't. I was driving home from my cousin's house. I didn't even get a chance to speak before he started yelling. I cried for 2 days. Matthews took the paper gently, her eyes scanning it. He made me feel like I wasn't even human, the woman whispered. But when I saw your story, I realized it wasn't me, it was him. A long pause passed between them. Then Matthews folded the citation neatly, handed it back, and placed a firm hand on the woman's shoulder. It was never you, she said. And now, it won't be someone else, either. Tears welled in the young woman's eyes, but this time, they were different, lighter, warmer. She nodded and walked away. Matthews stood there for a long moment, watching the sidewalk, hearing the city move around her, the honk of taxis, the footsteps of pedestrians, the hum of life. She didn't smile. She didn't need to, because she knew this fight wasn't a single victory, it was a ripple. One that would spread. The next day, the DOJ released a memo recommending new reforms for small-town police departments that receive federal funding. It cited the Ashford case directly. Among the suggestions, automatic dashcam cloud backups, independent civilian oversight boards, and mandatory audits of all citations involving minors or military personnel. Back at base, Matthews returned to her regular duties. She reviewed files, advised commanders, mentored young officers. Her schedule was full, her mission never clearer, but in her office, tucked inside a folder, was a single page she never discarded, Morrison's falsified report. Highlighted in yellow were the lies he typed, each one dissected during the hearing. She didn't keep it out of spite. She kept it as a reminder, a reminder that power misused isn't just dangerous, it's predictable, but people who stand up, especially when it's hard, can break the pattern. One evening, walking to her car in the soft orange glow of sunset, Matthews heard a voice behind her. Captain? She turned to see a fellow officer holding out a small envelope. This was delivered to your office today. No return name. She opened it. Inside was a handwritten note on simple lined paper. It read, I was wrong. I thought no one would ever stand up to me. You did. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I needed you to know you woke me up. It wasn't signed, but she didn't need a signature. She folded the note and slid it into her coat pocket. Then she got into her car and drove home. No sirens, no flashing lights, no badge on her chest, just a quiet woman with quiet strength, who once refused to look away when justice was on the line, and in doing so, changed a town forever.